Hi, welcome to Redcat University. I'm Matt, and today I'm going to show you how to replace some suspension parts on the Machete. Now, I'll be using the Machete 6S, but this process is exactly the same on the 4S as it is a 6S. Now, I know some of you have seen our Facebook post where we announced that we temporarily halted all production and all shipment of the Machete. Now, I am terribly sorry about this because I know some of you were so excited to get your Machete, and believe me, we were excited for you to get the Machete. We were so excited about this vehicle. We've done so much testing on this vehicle. We've done 4 months of just bashing this thing, jumping it, doing everything we could possibly do to it. And it just performed great. We didn't have any breakages. It performed flawlessly. Unfortunately, there were some inconsistencies with production. The assembly line, the vehicle that we got was assembled by the engineers at the factory, and they assembled the vehicle, perfectly to our specs. So the vehicle that we got was exactly like we designed it ultimately. But things happen. It's unfortunate, but things do happen. People are people, people make mistakes, and we understand that. We're not trying to bash our factory by any means. We understand there's a learning curve when the new vehicle hits the line. But what we've done is taken steps to avoid any more inconsistencies, right? Now, I know on the Facebook post, if you've seen the Facebook post, you saw that if you bought a Machete and it broke and you were just like, you know what, I don't want to mess with it, that we were offering a full refund for the Machete. No matter what condition the Machete was in, we're just going to give you a refund. For those of you who are willing to wait, we greatly appreciate your understanding and your patience, and we will be sending you some new parts. Now, this is whether the truck broke or not, you're still going to receive new parts, right? Every truck that went out that wasn't returned, new parts are going to be shipped for that vehicle. Now, not all vehicles were affected. Of course, this was an inconsistency. So some vehicles are perfectly fine. As a matter of fact, we had a guy that was just confused. He saw the Facebook post, he was confused, he didn't understand what was going on. And he's like, all right, so I had a bash fest that I was going to this weekend. Well, this was a couple weekends ago, right? But he's like, I had a bash fest I was going to this weekend, and I was gonna bash the Machete, but then I saw this post where something's wrong with it. And he's like, you know what? I'm gonna take it anyway, because if it breaks, it breaks. I'm gonna take it and I'm just gonna beat on it. And he did just that. He said he jumped that thing over and over and over. High jumps, and he's landing all weird, and nothing ever broke. He said he couldn't break it. So it's not every vehicle, and some of you watching this, might also be confused, being like, what are you talking about? My Machete's working fine. Well, you're still gonna get new parts. And we thank you for purchasing the Machete. We hope you're having a good time. We hope you're satisfied with it, and you're going to get a shipment of new parts. Not only that, you're going to get a $50 gift certificate that you can use anywhere on the Redcat website or any Redcat product. So, and that's just a thank you. Thank you for your patience. Thank you for your understanding. And well, thank you for buying the Machete. So, let me go over exactly what has happened here. So on the suspension arms, I've got a new one and an old one here, and I'm going to start with the old one, the original. All right, so here's the suspension arm, and this is the outer side, this is the inner side. So as you can see, there's a plastic outer piece as well as a plastic inner piece, and then there's an aluminum sleeve in the middle. Inside this arm is a steel grub screw. And what was happening at the factory is that grub screw was either put in too far or it wasn't put in far enough. And the plastic just didn't have enough. There was just not enough for that, plastic to grip onto that screw and have, integrity. So it was breaking. And so what we've done to remedy that, I have the new part here. The grub screw is much longer. And so now there's no way that they can put it in too far or not far enough. It'll seat inside here. It's much longer, which resulted in a beefier arm. Even from the original design of our specs, it's just a beefier arm. All right, so holding up both arms, you can see this part here where the grub screw went in, and on the new arm, it's much longer. Same with the bottom, it's much longer. The grub screw is much longer. They're not going to be able to, put it in too far or not far enough. It's a much longer grub screw, so you have a lot more steel inside this arm, and well, it's a lot beefier. Even with it installed correctly, the new design is a lot beefier. So yeah, so we're pretty excited about this. We went ahead and had them retool and for these new parts, and also went over some processes with them. And so another issue that was happening, this one was, again, not all vehicles were affected, and I think only a few were possibly affected by this. On some of the vehicles, the shock lower rod end, the ball cup, that was being screwed on too tight, and it was stripping the threads inside of there. Again, this was a few and far between happenstance there, but it did happen on a few vehicles. So we're also going to send out new lower rod ends for the shocks. So each person is going to get 4 new upper arms, whether yours broke or not. You're going to get 4 new shock ends, whether they broke or not, or stripped or not. And as well as that, there was one guy who brought to our attention that the center drive shaft twisted on him. So it's got an aluminum center drive shaft, and it twisted. So what he had done, from my understanding, is he locked the center differential, which the vehicle wasn't necessarily designed to have a locked center differential. It was designed to have a differential that could be used with multiple viscosities of oil to stiffen it or loosen it, depending on how you like to drive, but not necessarily locked. So that was a little bit beyond the design characteristics of the truck, but you know what? We understand, right? We understand that you're gonna get a vehicle and you're gonna wanna modify it, and you're gonna, you know, I get it. I do the same thing, right? We all do that. So, you know, what we've done is we redesigned the center drive shaft. So there's a hole that runs along the center of the center drive shaft, and that's to reduce rotational mass and weight, you know. And we've made that hole smaller, so there's more material in the drive shaft, and it'll withstand more torque. And we believe what was probably happening is you know, taking a jump. The center drive shaft is really, center differential is really important when jumping the vehicle, right? Because if you do a big jump and you're still kind of on the throttle and you hit the ground, what that center drive differential does is it'll when the rear wheels hit the ground and they're spinning and they just immediately stop, well, it transfers that motion to the front wheels. So it doesn't just shock the entire system, right? Without a center differential, if it's locked completely, what happens is if the rear wheels stop, well, the front ones do too. It doesn't transfer any of that force to the front wheels. So yeah, so what we've done anyway is we've redesigned the center drive shaft. It's got a smaller hole. We also know that some guys were saying that they were wanting to throw 8S in the truck. Well, the truck is not designed for 8S. It is designed for 6. We haven't tested it on 8. We've tested it on 4 and 6. So what we're doing is in the future we're in the plans of making some full steel center drive shafts. That way, if some guys want to you know, really go nuts with their truck, then we'll be offering as an aftermarket part some steel center drive shafts for that. But yeah, so now we know that if you're using the vehicle, you know, without locking the center diff, and you're just using, even if you use a heavier weight oil, you know, to get a little bit less ballooning in the front, or, you know, or if you're using a lighter weight oil, it doesn't matter. But as long as you're not locking it, we did do some testing on the vehicle with the original drive shafts, and we found pretty much every weight oil we used, the drive shafts were completely fine until we locked the center diff. Once we locked the center diff, and then we did notice that that they started to twist. So we've also redesigned the center drive shaft, and we're sending those out to you as well. Now, you'll probably never need them, especially if you're not locking the center diff. but you're gonna have them anyway. You can throw them in your pit box and they'll be there just in case, you know. Hey, who knows? You know, the center drive shafts, they're anodized in a nice red. I mean, they're beautiful. And, you know, maybe you get a rock in there and scratch up your drive shafts and you decide, hey, I want to change them out anyway. Well, you'll have them, right? You'll have a fresh set, beefier, and they'll be anodized and it'll look great. You can pop them back in your truck. So, yeah, all right, so there it is. And again, we thank you for your patience and for your understanding. And again, we feel like we have everything completely worked out. We hope it wasn't too much of an inconvenience for you. And let's go ahead and get started on replacing the suspension components. All right, before we get started, let's go over the tools you'll need real quick. You'll need a 2.5mm hex driver. You'll need a 17mm socket driver or 17mm T-wrench if that's what you've got to get off the wheel nut. You'll either need a pair of shock pliers, which are designed to grip the shock shaft as you unscrew the end, or you can possibly use a pair of pliers with a rubber insert or you know, doubling up a rag or something like that. We'll go over this in a little bit as we're doing it. Or a pair of flush side cutters. And to get the shock retaining cup off, you'll need either a flathead screwdriver or something like this C-ring remover, which basically they're a pair of reversed pliers, right? You squeeze them and it spreads. They're spreaders. So those are the tools you'll need, and let's go ahead and zoom in and get started. All right, so we're going to start by taking the tire and wheel off. We have a 17mm socket, and just okay, just leave that nut right in there. Now we are going to remove the shock. Now what you need for the shock is a 2.5mm hex driver. I am actually going to use a powered driver with a 2.5mm hex insert in it. If you're going to use a power tool, it's best not to use a driver that is high speed or high torque. The reason for that is because the faster you unscrew these screws, the more heat they're going to create from friction inside the threads, and it can heat up the plastic and it can weaken the threads. So I use this one here. It's a low speed and it seems to work really well. Also, when you're putting it back in, you don't want a high torque one. I usually finish up with the hand driver. That way I can get just the right amount of torque on the bolt. You don't want it too tight where you're going to strip them. And this goes for any RC. It doesn't matter what brand or model or anything. Okay, I'm going to set the shock screw here. So the shocks just have 2 screws. Both screws are the same length, and as you'll see, they are shorter than either of the upper arm screws. Just pop that shock out, and we're going to set this aside for now. Now we're going to work on the outer part of the upper arm. All right, as you can see, this outer arm screw, it is threaded all the way, but it is longer than either of the shock screws. All right, because I'm at such an angle and I don't want to remove the wheelie bar or anything, I'm just going to use the hand driver to remove this inner upper arm screw. Okay, so it came out of this one. It's going to bind in this one a little bit, so I'm just going to finish by unscrewing it. Okay, as you can see, the threads do not go all the way up on this hinge pin slash screw. That's the inner one. Now you'll note that the dog bone is going to likely come free of the diff outdrive cup. Just be sure that when we're putting it back together, we're going to line that back up and seat it back in there. Okay, so now I have the new upper arm, and this is the older upper arm, and we can tell the new one because it's got a lot more material on it. But you do want to make sure that everything is lined up correctly. We have an R for right and R for right. Of course, that is in reference to if you're driving the vehicle or looking at it from the rear, the passenger side will be the right, the driver's side will be the left. So just do these one at a time, make sure they line up, how you took it out, and you should have no problems. Okay, now we're going to do the back one. I'm going to start this with the hand driver. And when you're putting it in, you want to make sure you're lining these up and wiggling, and when you feel a little bit of resistance, give just a tiny bit of a turn and make sure it's in the hole. So that way you're not pushing on the plastic where the hole isn't and then damaging the tab. Now I forgot to mention again that I did make sure that the dog bone is inside of the diff outdrive cup. You want to make sure you do that as well. And I'm going to finish it by hand. And pretty much as soon as I feel it stop, with just a little bit of pressure there, and I see that it's completely seated there, then we're done. All right. Now we'll move on to the shock. Now, as mentioned before, there is a possibility that you're not going to have to replace the end on the shock because not all of them were over tightened. All right, when working with the shock here, there's one thing you should know. On this ball end, there's a notch here. Well, on the inside of the spring retainer cup, there is also a notch or a groove. These clip into each other. These are designed so that you're not going to lose the spring retainer cup, but if you just try to pull back, it's not going to come off. You've got to spread the spring retainer cup just a little bit, and then it'll pull back. So, while you can use a flathead screwdriver or something like this automotive clip remover, I prefer to use C-clip pliers. And they basically are pliers that work in reverse. They spread instead of squeeze. So if you just give a slight spread, it'll come right off. and then you can move that to the side, use your thumb and finger and pull back the spring a little bit, and it's pretty easy to get that off. Okay, so we'll move the spring stuff out of the way. Here's the new one. All right, now, one of the most important things to remember when you're removing the ball end is you do not want to mark up the shock shaft. If you use, say, regular pliers with the teeth on them, what's going to happen if you grip it, you may not think you're marking it up, but even if the shaft itself doesn't spin, what's going to happen is it's going to put little grooves in this shaft, and that material has to go somewhere, so it's going to raise some material and dip down some material. And when the shock goes in and out, it's going to end up wearing out the seals inside of the shock, and the shock will leak. We don't want that. So you can use a cloth, wrap it around it, and then do it that way. Shock shaft pliers work the best. They're smooth, they go around there, they're designed for this. If you don't have those, I prefer personally to use flush side cutters. And while doing this, you just put the cutters right up against the ball end here. And while it does make a tiny bit of a groove in there, when you have the shock spring retainer cut back on, it will not allow this to go in to that point. It'll stop about there, and you won't have any issues with that. Use the method that you're most comfortable with. If you're using pliers and a cloth, you still have to be very careful because you've got to squeeze really hard because the shaft wants to slip in that cloth, and you still have to squeeze really hard, and it is still possible to mark it up. So if you're using that method, go ahead and double it up. Another option would be if you have a piece of rubber used in, say, like a high quality pit mat or something like that. You could use that. So I'm just going to unscrew this. All right, now there is a little bit of plastic on this one, and what we're going to do is just use our fingernail and turn the threads with my fingernail going in the groove of the thread, and it's just going to clean out anything that's in the threads. And now it's nice and clean, ready for our new end. Now we're going to go ahead and thread this. Just thread this back on. And grip this. I'm going to actually grip this on the very top thread here. I try to stay off the shaft, the smooth part of the shaft, as much as I can. So I'm going to grip it on the very top thread. You don't want to grip it down in the middle of the threads, just in case you mark up a thread. And now that I'm pretty much at the end, I'm going to move it up just a little bit and finish screwing it in. All right, as soon as you're at the top of the threads there, you're done. Just put the spring back on. Hold the spring back with one hand. Make sure the cup's on the correct way. All right, as you can see, that did not snap back in because we have to spread that spring retainer cup. So we're just going to spread it, and there it goes. Snaps right back into place. All right, now that we have the shock back together, let's get it back into the truck. Now when you're putting it in, you want to make sure you line these balls up into the slot. Sometimes they can be challenging. All right, there we have that one. You can use your fingernail, or you can even use a hex driver to kind of get them squared up. If the ball is at an angle, as it's trying to go in, it won't want to go in, so it's best to make sure it's lined up. And once you get it lined up perfectly and just apply a little bit of pressure, it'll go in nice. Okay. All right, we want it tight, but not over tight. All right, there you have it. We're gonna put the tire back on. Now, I'm sure you know this. Make sure that pin is still seated in there properly. There's also a hex on the inside of the wheel, as you can see there. Just put the tire on and then with a little bit of pressure, spin it, it'll jump into place. The wheel nut has got knurling on one side. It's knurled on this side, it's smooth on this side. So you want the smooth side out, you want the knurled side, which acts as a lock nut. You want that toward the wheel. And you'll see the mark on the wheel from the knurl. Use your 17mm socket, and there you have it. Now you're going to repeat these steps on all of the four corners. Thing you want to watch out for is you want to make sure you don't want to use a left on a right, and also you'll note on these there is a curved side, it curves out, and this is more of a straighter side. The curve is going to go toward the center of the vehicle. So the back one, the curve is here. The front one, the curve would be like this here. Also, when you're putting it on, you'll notice that this end is curved up. When you're putting it on, always make sure you can see the R. So it's going to curve up. So you can see the R from looking straight down at it. Or on the other side, of course, on the left side, you'll see the L.